Early August 2026. Northern Arabian Sea, south of Iran. On the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, a loop runs without stopping. A catapult hurls a fighter off the bow. Minutes later, another one returns, catches a wire, and decelerates from flying speed to a full stop in roughly 2 seconds. It gets towed clear, fueled, inspected, rearmed, and queued up to go off the bow again. All day, all night. One day rolling into the next. What made the first week of August worth examining is that the shooting had already ended. Consecutive night strikes against Iran wrapped in the final days of July, and negotiators returned to the table. The rhythm on the deck did not change. A blockade was still in effect, and a blockade is not enforced with bombs. It is enforced with presence. And every cycle of that loop is a controlled act of damage aimed at the aircraft itself. The catapult drives force into the airframe, the wire drags it back through the landing gear and the tail hook. In between, the aircraft sits outside in sea air, under hot exhaust washing off the jets parked around it. The force doing the most damage to these airplanes was never fired at them. It came from their own operating cycle. By early August, that ship had been running that cycle for more than 200 days without touching a pier, longer than any modern carrier on record. So, how is anything still flying? The answer sits in the hangar below the flight deck, where maintainers were racing chemistry and fatigued metal with whatever they brought from San Diego and could not restock. At Navy Intel, we don't count aircraft on a carrier. We look at the cost, because every capability consumes the thing producing it, and the only question worth asking is who absorbs that loss. Lincoln departed San Diego in late November 2025, stopped at Guam for 2 days in mid-December, and that was the only port call of the entire deployment. The war with Iran began February 28, 2026. Aircraft from carrier Air Wing 9 flew in the opening strikes, and across the 40-day campaign that followed, that air wing launched thousands of sorties against Iran's southern axis. What followed was a naval blockade with Lincoln as the enforcing instrument, running through mid-July, when a fresh round of night strikes spanning nearly 2 weeks reopened the shooting. The strikes ended again at the end of July. The blockade did not. The deployment placed 2 fundamentally different kinds of work on the same set of airframes. The strike phases sent aircraft off the deck and brought them back significantly heavier. The blockade phase meant lighter loads, but no finish line. It demands continuous presence, hour after hour over water, and by early August, it had numbers to show for it. 35 merchant vessels turned back, 4 stopped outright. 2 different kinds of wear, and neither outranks the other. The same airframes absorbed a 40-day strike campaign, months of unbroken presence, then 2 more weeks of night strikes, with no port call in any of it. So when the shooting stopped, the hangar bay did not get easier. It changed jobs. Now the number that puts all of it in context. A Nimitz-class carrier is designed to sustain roughly 120 launches and recoveries per day across a 12-hour flight day, and hold that rate for 30 days before its maintenance reserve needs rebuilding. 30 days, then a reset. That is the assumption baked into the design. But the entire model of naval aviation maintenance depends on that reset actually coming. A port call, a window to pay back what was deferred. Deferral is legitimate, as long as somewhere exists to defer to. On this deployment, for more than 200 days, nowhere did. Which makes the most concrete question available the first one worth asking. What does a single launch and a single recovery take out of an airplane? 2 forces work on the airframe every time it flies. One comes from the ship it launches off, the other comes from the air surrounding it. Neither is trying to destroy it. A catapult stroke takes an airframe from standstill to flying speed in about 300 feet. All of that force runs through the nose gear and into the main structural members. The recovery is harder, and it is not a landing. There is no flare. The aircraft flies into the deck, the tailhook grabs the wire, and the aircraft's entire kinetic energy funnels through one attachment point at the tail, while the fuselage is dragged backward at 3 to 4.5 G. Neither event breaks anything, not immediately, and that is exactly the problem. Metal under repeated load does not fail on the first cycle, it accumulates. Each cycle drives a microscopic defect a fraction further until the crack is long enough that what remains cannot carry the load. Fatigue cracking. And at the stage where it matters most, it sits underneath the paint, invisible. What determines how fast it accumulates is weight. Two sortie logs showing identical counts can burn structural life at completely different rates. The expensive part is not the launch, it is the return. The maximum weight at which an aircraft can take a wire sits well below the weight at which it can be catapulted off. Anything coming home with weapons still on the racks arrives at exactly the weight the wire has to stop. That condition has a name in the design file: bring back. It is a requirement, not a bonus. The FDA-18E was built to land carrying up to 9,000 pounds of unexpended ordnance. The F-35C must be capable of trapping while still carrying two 2,000-pound weapons and a pair of air-to-air missiles. Anything beyond that budget gets dropped on target or goes into the sea before the landing pattern. A 40-day strike campaign in spring and 2 more weeks of it in July did not only consume fuel and ordnance, they drew on the fatigue life of the structure at a rate the same number of light sorties would never approach. Then there is chemistry. The stealth of an F-35C is not only its shape, it is the radar-absorbent coating applied across the entire airframe, containing microscopic iron particles engineered to absorb electromagnetic energy. The airframe is mostly composite. Composite does not rust. Iron powder does. Place that coating into saturated air carrying chloride ions, and the reaction begins. Nobody starts it. It does not stop at the end of a shift. After a few months deployed, reddish-brown streaks appear on the surface. What degrades is not the paint but the radar cross-section itself. The precise capability that costs $100 million per airframe. The same air goes down the intake, where salt at operating temperature stops behaving like salt and begins eating the coatings on turbine blades from within. So the thing attacking the most expensive aircraft on that deck, every hour of every one of those days, never fired a shot. It was the air. All of that has a unit of measure: maintenance man-hours per flight hour, the exchange rate between time in the air and time below deck. The F-35A, built for a runway, runs at 4.79. The F-35C, the same aircraft rebuilt to survive the catapult, the wire, and the sea air, sits at 7.55, as last officially reported. Same core design. Everything the carrier environment adds gets paid for twice, once in what the airframe carries, and again in the labor required to keep it flying. The cost of every hour airborne rises by roughly half, and when that cost climbs far enough, it stops staying in the shop. An F-35C can run in afterburner above Mach 1.3 for a cumulative total of 50 seconds. The pilot cannot throttle back and re-enter the regime to earn more. That limit came out of test flights where thermal friction in that regime damaged the tail, and the Pentagon chose to manage it procedurally rather than engineer a fix. The need to protect the airframe did not stay below deck. It moved into the cockpit and rewrote the flight envelope. Every flying night ends with a set of airframes slightly worse than the night before, mostly in ways no one can see. But how do you find the damage when the depot is on the other side of the world? On land, anything beyond a squadron's capability goes back to a depot. At sea, that depot is 8,000 nautical miles away, and nothing in the inventory can carry an airframe there. So the Navy divides maintenance into 3 levels, and the middle tier is what makes extended deployments possible at all. Squadrons maintain their own aircraft on the deck. Depots ashore handle overhaul. Between them sits the ship's intermediate maintenance department, performing deep repair and inspection in the middle of the ocean. Everything it can fix is something that does not have to cross 8,000 miles, and one detail captures the philosophy behind it entirely. That department nearly doubles its manning when the ship deploys, with detachments from shore-based readiness centers sailing along. The factory only reaches full size once it leaves the pier, and even then, it is a fixed number for the next 8 months. The crack nobody can see has people whose entire job is to hunt it. Technicians who examine metal without cutting into it. One method uses a changing magnetic field to drive eddy currents through a conductive material. A crack disrupts the path those currents follow, and the shift in impedance registers on an instrument, reading damage hidden beneath the paint without stripping it off. A second method sends high-frequency sound into the structure and reads the echo back. That one matters most for composites, where the failure mode is not a crack at all, but delamination. internal damage with a surface that still looks perfect. These technicians are not looking for what has failed. They are looking for what is going to fail, in noise and vibration on a moving deck. Restoring the coating is slower. Where corrosion has taken hold, it is cleaned back with non-metallic tools, because a metal tool creates a fresh galvanic reaction of its own, treating one spot while seeding the next. Then the coating must cure, and curing requires stable temperature and humidity. But the hangar bay opens onto the sea, and summer in the northern Arabian Sea is the peak of the southwest monsoon. Hot, saturated, windy. The conditions that job requires do not exist on that ship. So the work is either deferred or done below specification, and both outcomes carry a price. Nothing signs itself off. The authority to release an aircraft as airworthy belongs only to personnel designated in writing by the commander, exercised only after cross-checking maintenance records, engine logs, and oil consumption reports. That is the point where the entire condition of an airframe reduces to one person and one signature. This factory is capable, and it was built by people who understood exactly what they were up against. But it has a hard ceiling, and that ceiling is not skill. Sometimes the ship simply cannot fix it. Rather than treat that as failure, the Navy converted it into a coded system. When a component exceeds what can be repaired aboard, it is tagged with a reason. One code means the ship lacks the equipment for the job. Another means the job is possible, but a needed part does not exist anywhere in inventory. The system records why the repair failed, not merely that it did. And across a long campaign, the code that dominates is the one whose cause lies entirely outside the ship, missing parts. Then there is the hardest move on the board. A fighter needs a part to fly tonight, and supply has none. So it comes off another aircraft already down for maintenance. Tactically, that is correct. The shortage moves from a jet about to launch to one already off the schedule, but the part gets pulled twice and logged twice, and the work being moved is larger than what was originally there. What it spends is maintenance hours. Done often enough, much of it never reaches the books, and the readiness picture ashore ends up brighter than the one on the deck. None of that is a criticism of the crew. They made the right call. The system placed them where that call had to be made. There is one more ledger, and it was supposed to be automatic. The F-35 tracks its own component health through a logistics system built for land bases, now running on narrow satellite bandwidth. One Air Force unit estimated more than 45,000 man-hours a year spent on manual workarounds because of it. Labor the software was meant to carry moved on to human time. Here is where all of it lands as a number. Across fiscal year 2025, the F-35 fleet finished with 44% of airframes capable of flying at least one assigned mission, down from 67% 4 years earlier. Among the officially listed causes, alongside parts shortages, is a word that has been present in this video since the beginning: corrosion. That describes the problem. It does not grade the people solving it. Because everything described so far has been a material shortage: parts, equipment, bandwidth. But the scarcest resource on that ship in its 8th month was not in any storeroom. The Navy does not manage heat with an ordinary thermometer. It uses an index that folds humidity, wind, and sun into the temperature reading, then flies a colored flag governing work and rest cycles. At 90 degrees, the flag goes black. Essential operational tasks only. In those waters at that time of year, the heat index runs near 125, and enclosed spaces are rated a level worse than whatever is measured outside. The hangar bay is one of them. A single aircraft launch hits 150 decibels. Double hearing protection reduces that by about 30. The rest enters the ear, and the deck operates on hand signals. And when sleep debt grows large enough, the brain starts forcing micro-sleeps lasting 5 to 15 seconds. The eyes stay open. The hands still hold the tool. Nothing arriving from outside is being processed. After an incident, investigators can measure blood alcohol. They can measure carbon monoxide. There is no test that measures how tired a person was at the moment it happened. Every mechanism in this story moves a shortfall somewhere else. The question remaining is where that somewhere else is. A wear cycle that does not stop. A factory with a hard ceiling and a set of mechanisms for relocating the overflow. Not one of those mechanisms erases damage. They only decide where it lands, And when every route has been used, no aircraft left to strip, no port to defer to, it lands in the only place remaining, the judgment of a person standing under an airplane at 3 in the morning. Parts can be flown out to a carrier, so can fresh crews. What cannot be transferred is the accumulated understanding of exactly what each airframe has already been through. The same ship and the same air wing went to the Middle East in 2024, 5 months, with port calls, hardware, personnel, and procedures were unchanged. The only variable that shifted was time without a reset. Moving a debt only means something when a due date exists. So here is what actually happened. Across more than 200 days, that ship did not miss a cycle it was ordered to run. The standing record for consecutive days at sea had already been left behind by mid-July, and the loop kept running after that. That was not achieved by beating chemistry. Nobody beats chemistry. It was achieved through judgment. Thousands of times, one airframe at a time, deciding which defect is safe to carry tonight and which one is not. No checklist produces that decision. No software generates it. It comes from someone 16 hours into a shift, under a black flag, who knows exactly what this particular aircraft has been through, and who signs their name to it. That is the kind of skill that never appears on a readiness report, because what it produces is things that did not happen, the flight not canceled, the crack caught before it progressed. What kept those aircraft flying was not the technology on them. It was more than 5,000 people who never got ashore, holding a system together, well past the point its design assumed. There is a layer beneath even this one. What determines how long a ship can remain at sea before maintenance ever becomes the question? The replenishment chain and the logistics ships nobody films. That is where Navy intel goes next. This one ends where it began. A catapult throws one off the bow. A wire brings one back. The loop runs day and night, and every turn removes a piece of the airplane with it, which means what the ship produces was never sorties. What it manufactures every day in a hot steel compartment beneath the runway is restored airframes, and that factory never quite keeps pace with the loop above it. So the thing keeping aircraft flying off CVN-72 in the summer of 2026 was not a repair shop. It was a triage architecture, built to decide which damage is cleared to fly tonight, and to route the rest wherever it does the least harm. It does not defeat wear, it manages wear, and it does that better than any system that has ever gone to sea. When negotiators returned to the table in early August, the loop on the deck kept running. A blockade does not end because a conference room has its lights on. But the last component in that architecture is not a procedure. It is a person 8 months without shore leave, signing a logbook before an airplane is allowed to leave the deck. That is the part worth carrying out of this. Every system run past its design point becomes a triage system, and the engineering question stops being whether something can be fixed. It becomes where the damage lands. And in every system with a person inside the loop, the answer is the same place. If the scarce resource on a carrier is man-hours rather than spare parts, then the thing worth designing next may not be a stealthier aircraft. It may be a less expensive one, measured in human time,